Dr. McKenna, what is top of mind for you today?
Well, what's top of mind, Sabbath, is a question I have for you. And I'm curious about the characteristics of memorable professors. So, what would you say are some of the things, like if you think about a professor who comes to mind, what are some of the reasons that that person comes to mind?
I am thinking of one of my Greek professors in Bible college. He was kind of the person I wanted to be like. So it wasn't just like he was so good at the subject that we were learning. He also was just good at doing life with others. So he would tell stories about his wife and his kids and their community. And I would think, okay, this guy is kind of living out the things that he's teaching us, and I kind of want to be like him when I grow up. So I have a handful of professors that I'm still trying to be when I grow up. I'm moving slowly closer to them. That's what comes to mind. He was also so humble. Like
Huh,
this guy
huh.
knew what he was talking about, and he could exegete like nobody else in our community. But
Yeah,
he didn't say, "Well, let me tell you what it means." He just let it come out in conversation very naturally.
yeah, I love it. Are you in touch with him today?
Via social media. I haven't
Okay,
actually connected with him in person, but yeah.
okay. Well, I have a professor in mind that I can speak boldly about that my wife and I both would say he was our favorite professor. And also one of my closest friends in the world would say the same. We all had him. It's funny thinking about why. Like, why is that true? One thing was that he was incredibly intimidating. He was bloody smart. And he it was very obvious, like some of the things I think you just described too, like that he just cared deeply about what he was teaching, and that connection between the content of the teaching and the students was just always apparent. That care, but also that kind of scary but caring is kind of the
Hmm.
way I would say, like, it makes it very, very memorable, like that. And I can even tell you, like, the way that he would actually he'd stand in the front of the room with, like this, with his elbow underneath, and he'd have he'd hold his finger over his mustache as he's doing the Socratic method in class because he's an attorney, and just it, but the three of us would say, and so many more if you ask, would say he was by far our favorite professor. And no offense to any of my other professors. And what I'm excited about today is that he is our guest on the podcast. So let's go.
Yeah. Let's get this wild conversation going. And welcome to the wild conversation where human being and human doing converge, reshaping the world of leadership, culture, and performance. Today, we get to have a wild conversation with Alec Hill. Alec is the president emeritus of InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. He served for 14 years as InterVarsity's president and previously was dean of the School of Business and Economics at Seattle Pacific University. And like we may have heard already, he was Dr. McKenna and his wife's most memorable professor when they were students there at SVU. He holds a law degree from the University of Washington. He's the author of Just Business: Christian Ethics in the Marketplace. He mentors rising leaders, represents InterVarsity externally, consults, and teaches. And with his brother Grant as a donor, he received a successful bone marrow, followed by a year of quasi-isolation after being diagnosed with cancer in 2015. And then came his most recent book, Living in Bonus Time: Surviving Cancer, Finding New Purpose. Alec, thank you for being with us today.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
We're excited for this conversation, and we're going to get started with a round of wild cards. I don't know if you've ever played, but we like to open up our podcasts and guests with very simple but deep questions. I pulled 10 cards. We have a deck of 50.
You didn't warn me about
I
this.
did not warn
Yeah.
you about this.
So what do I
um,
think? What do I really think about Rob? Is that question
yeah,
number one?
No.
Rob, number one, you can go 1 to 10. Um, so I pulled 10. I'll choose a number and pull the card and answer it. And then you can go next. Alec, choose a number between 1 and 10, and I'll pull that card and you can answer it. And then Rob will round us out. And you can answer in as simple as a one sentence, or you can go in deep as you want. All right, I'm going to choose number 4. And it is: who in your life or work needs your encouragement today? I'm going to go with a simple answer, and that's my kids. They are taking state standardized testing today. And so before they left the house, gave them a kiss and encouraged them to do their best, and tried to remember like one question at a time. Don't try to figure it all out, just one question at a time. All right, Alec.
Number
Pick a
7.
number. Okay. Are you more of a truth speaker or a peacekeeper?
By temperament, I'm more of a peacekeeper. I've learned to be a better truth teller,
Huh.
but that's been too late in some cases.
Huh.
Although Rob would disagree. He thinks I was a great truth teller back then.
That's right. That's right. I'll go number 8. Is that what you
Okay.
picked?
Number 8 is, what did you experience in the last 24 hours that may have been a moment that mattered?
A moment that mattered. Just the conversation with Alec before we jumped on to begin recording, I think is a moment that mattered. I pay attention to those things. These kinds of cycles in life really matter to me. I think just the moments right before we started recording. Thank you,
Thank you,
Sarah.
Alec. Thank you for playing. Sorry,
Yeah,
Antonia.
That wasn't too hard.
Okay.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Alec, thank you. And Sabbath, thanks for that launching us in. This is almost too fun, too fun. I think back to those moments in class, kind of amazing times, because I think some of the things that you brought in terms I remember the strategy talk, the ethics talk, business law, all the things that were a part of those classes. And I don't remember a lot of things from classes. Those were important times. And my wife Jackie and I were talking about how much we appreciated you as a professor. What are some of the things early on that had an effect on the person you are today, the leader you are today?
I go back to when I was 27. I was a lawyer and I hated law. So I was at this crossroads really quite early that I had to decide whether I was going to stay in or get out. And so I began to look around, and World Relief was opening an office in Seattle, and I applied. And for some reason, they hired me. I had no management experience, nothing on paper. Within a few years, we were resettling 1,000 refugees a year. I mean, it was an amazing thing. And I had staff in Portland and Seattle. The State Department came and did audits. I mean, I was really in the deep water being responsible for these folks coming over from Southeast Asia, from Cuba, Poland, Afghanistan, Ethiopia, and I just learned a heck of a lot. So I'm 27 to 32. That's that stretch of time for 5 years. That was before I met you. I learned how to be resilient because every week something new would come up. It was a very complicated job for a 27, 28-year-old kid, which is what I was. And I learned how to prioritize. I learned how to not let things that seemed like they would be on front of mind, I put them in the back because I had to do something else first. Obviously, cultural, I learned to adapt culturally because the variety of people we were working with. But my staff ranged in age from 55. I was the youngest person on my staff, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
I had all of these more seasoned pros, and it was a remarkable team. And as I look back on my life, that was my favorite team. I'm surprised to say that because I've had teams at the university and then at InterVarsity, but that World Relief team was just magical. And
Huh.
I grew up. I grew up with that team.
Huh. What was it about them? Because I remember this now. Remember you telling stories about this, but what was it about that team that makes it so good?
I think it was both the individuals. We had some real characters. I mean, we had, uh, of each of the groups that we resettled, we'd have a staff member. So we had this very multi-ethnic, multicultural, diverse group that was just absolutely wonderful. And we just gelled. I mean,
Huh.
it
Huh.
was a magic of chemistry, and I didn't even know how to. I was you call it providence or luck. I was just really fortunate that I ended up with this group of people at that point in my life because I really wasn't prepared to lead from a pocket full of experiences. If they had been challenging, difficult, ornery, I might have failed.
Yeah.
But they were older, lifted me up, cared for me, loved me, forgave me. There was a lot of grace in that office, and we just there were crazy times like the last 2 months of the fiscal year, which were July and September, August and September, the refugees just came pouring in, and then they would slow down in the fall. And we had to find sponsors, that is, churches and other groups that would take care of them for the first 90 days to 6 months. And I don't know how we survived some of those floods, but we did.
Mm,
We had a
mm.
jobs program. We had a number of things that we had contracts with the state. We had to meet obligations. So there was a lot of pressure. And but the thing about it, the mission of it was so important and so real. And these people were so special who were coming in, and they'd been through so much tragedy that there was no question you get up every morning that it was really significant work. And
Wow.
and I'm an idealist at heart, and it tapped into all that sort of missional stuff that drives me.
Interesting. You're making me think about like so my older son went from he graduated last June from college and with a finance degree and then was in the job search process and then just so happens all of a sudden, he's out there, he's putting a lot of resumes out there trying to figure it out. And then he landed a job and now he's been in almost it's coming up on 3 months. Like his quarterly review is coming up. And he's in the space and defense industry.
Whoa.
And yeah, it's kind of nuts. And he's a financial analyst. And one of the things I asked him, Alec, that I wanted to ask you about is I know because I've been so embedded in the leader development research about how important those initial experiences are. And he's getting exposure. I mean, you and I would look at it if you had dinner with him and you talked to him, you'd be like, "Do you understand what you're getting exposure to?" He's getting exposure to the space and defense industry, first of all, but he's getting very senior leader exposure on the project side of their work. It's an engineering kind of culture. And so I just pepper him with questions like, "So what are you learning right now?" And I don't know if when you're that age and you were a little bit older, if you really understand what you're soaking up when you're going through that. And I'm curious about as you look back on that's a pretty significant early career role. Like
Yeah.
what did it affect in you going forward? Like even
Well,
maybe
well,
today.
well, let me tell you a little bit of my legal experience, which is the polar opposite. So the first firm I worked for was corrupt. They were taking bribes from the city under the table. The second job, the lead attorney committed suicide because he was a pedophile. And the third firm, they had two or three divisions. They couldn't get along, so they split. People kept leaving the firm. That's my negative experience in law. That's probably one of the reasons
Yeah.
I didn't say. And I wonder what my life would have been like if I had been in a really nurturing law firm that had really cared for its people and had been ethical. My life would have taken a totally different track. But because it was so adverse, I just wanted out. And then I ended up going relief and development. And so I have both negative and positive stories.
That's so interesting. And you know that like I always tell people that like role models play a critical role. It's
They
a
do.
key developmental experience for people, but
Yep.
one-third of the time they were bad role models. So I tell people if you're doing a horrible job, there's good news that you're going to be a great experiential developmental moment for somebody.
Well, no, I think the legal experiences, that's what I didn't want to be. And that's
Yeah.
where I that's
Yeah.
where I that's where I didn't want to go. And the good news about my life is at 27, I had the courage to break out of after having invested 3 years in law school and all that stuff that I made the decision to go. And
Yeah.
that's unusual. I mean, as I look back on it, most people would have stayed longer, but I just knew that I wanted to do something else.
Wow. And so tell me about the transition to the academic side.
So this was a funny story, Rob. You probably don't know this. So I'm 27 and I'm starting to teach at the university as well,
Yeah.
part-time. So I'm a part-time teacher. I come from a family of teachers. I'm a good teacher. It's largely because of my mother, who was the department head of foreign languages at Roosevelt High School in Seattle. My mom was a strict teacher. Never smile
Uh,
until December, she used to say. So that was my mom. And so I was teaching part time and still doing and then doing this world relief thing, and the logs started to separate, and the work got busier and busier with world relief, and so at one point after 3 years of teaching part time, I dropped out. Thankfully, the next two part time teachers weren't very good. Apparently, I never met them, and so by the time the sixth year came around, the university came to me and offered me a full time job. And it wasn't competitive. I mean, they just asked me. So I was 32 and it was a hard choice.
yeah.
I was ambivalent. Of course, eventually said yes. And then I did that for the next 16 years of my life. I was at the university.
Okay. And what year did you start teaching there?
Full time, it was 1985.
in those moments, we were kind of, that's where we were crossing because I probably was in your class in 87, 88. So it's fascinating. You seemed so seasoned as a professor, but you had some
No,
good
no,
experience behind you.
well, I had taught the course again over, I'd probably
Yeah,
already taught the course 10 times as a part-timer, but I was relatively new as a tenure track faculty.
that is
And
so
that
interesting.
was very unusual. Not very many faculty come out of the adjunct pool, and none of them become deans. So it's a fascinating story. And when you take the fact that I'm a lawyer, I have never taken a management or accounting class in my
Yeah.
life, and I'm the dean of the business school, I was a total fraud all the way through.
Boy, do I relate to that. When I started teaching at Azusa Pacific, I was all I had is I had a little bit of consulting experience being dragged around by my older brother, and by
I know
Doug.
Doug. I know
And
Doug, yeah.
yeah, and so I had that, but what's funny because I had been embedded in the leader development research, and so I realized that so much of learning occurs through experiences, and I realized that, well, if I have a 3 hour class, the best resource I have outside of the textbook is their experience. And so I ended up designing classes around at least half of it was drawing their experience out in the classroom. And it was like,
Smart.
and it ended up shaping my whole professorial career, I think, in the way that I taught love it or hate it students, that were out there. Um, so related to this, I'm kind of curious about when embracing the role of leader
Mhm.
became important for you personally.
I'd say about age 8, I wanted to be class president. I've always, I was the baseball captain. I was always kind of the guy. In those days, we used that term. It was very gender specific. And so I was born with a drive to lead. I fought
Hmm.
it for years in the sense that I thought it was self-promoting and ambitious. And I think at times in my life it has been, but there was no denying that that was always there. But to tell you a story, so let me shift gears
Yeah.
because I think one of the part of this questions is who
Yeah.
invited me
Oh,
to out. And so I'm back. Let's get to the university, and I'm there 5+ years. That's when you knew me. I
yeah.
love teaching, and then about year 7, right around tenure, I started getting really bored, and I started going like, okay, I'm in my late 30s. This is just midlife crisis. I'll get through this, and I'll be a professor the rest of my life. I'm now set with tenure. And I woke up and I'd go, I'm going to be teaching business law 3 times a year for the next 30 years. And there
Hmm.
was something in me that screamed out. It kind of went a little crazy. So, unbeknownst to you and other students, I was interviewing at World Vision. I was looking for another way to go, and
Yeah.
I wanted out,
Yeah.
which was really disappointing. We lived 2 blocks from campus. We had these 2 delightful little girls. Everything in our life was set. The university was finally paying me a decent salary, and I had summers off. It was like the perfect life. But there was something in me that just was unhappy. Thankfully, the dean position came open. I became dean in my early 40s. During that time, in business schools, there's something called secondary accreditation, and only a third of business schools have it. So we set our goal to get secondary accreditation, and we were a really small school to get this, and we did. And I think having a North Star goal
Yeah.
was really good for me and for the school. It drove me. So to answer your question, I think in the long run, I've always felt like this leader. I think the invitation came from the provost, uh, who hired me to be the dean. And
Yeah.
there was a really excellent outside candidate who on paper was better qualified. And
Oh,
if that decision had gone the other way, I'm not sure where my life would have gone.
yeah. It's so funny because I can remember exactly where I was where you and I were talking on the phone. I was sitting by the Fremont Bridge. I don't know why I remember this. And I remember you telling me that story about that 7 years. And I lasted a long, long time in ways I didn't really imagine that I would, because I spent 25 years in higher ed, but I also never really fully fit, as you know. So I always had sort of my thing on the outside. I always thought it was just normal to have 2 jobs, not realizing that how stressful that was until I didn't have 2 jobs. I realized,
Well,
oh,
and how some of your peers were critical of the two part, and you
yeah,
brought all that back into your teaching, but
yeah.
some people didn't consider it academic enough.
Yeah, and it's
Yep.
funny how when universities talk about their professors being people who do what they teach, what they don't say is that that means that that person has 2 jobs. You know what I mean? So they're actually in practice and they're out there doing it and they're bringing it back and it does get harder. So this invitation to lead. And I know that for me, that transition out of the academic world, when I was playing these two roles. So I'm running a business and I'm also keeping my foot in the graduate program I was running. But one of the things I experienced when I left was so many things that I didn't realize I could see. Um, that until I got outside of even my own guild, because I cut my teeth in the field of industrial organizational psych, which is a very powerful guild in terms of your identity and telling you what you're about and telling you what's important in terms of organizational work and leadership.
No.
When I got outside of it and I started to run my own business, there was a whole other set of lessons that were out there that I didn't realize were available to me. And I'm curious about you and that step out of that academic world. So you go into the dean role, and then you go to InterVarsity. And I'm curious.
Yeah, and so I went from an organization, a university where I was responsible for 35 faculty and staff to an organization which had over 1,000 staff, and it was national, and that grew to 1,600 while I was there. And so it was I missed a step. I mean, there should have been a step between being a dean and leading a large organization, and I was never a vice president. So I had enough cockiness in myself that they offered me the position. Again, I was shocked that they chose me.
uh,
And we moved to Madison, Wisconsin. But talk about being way over my head.
uh,
And sort of my self-assuredness worked against me because there were just a lot of lessons I hadn't learned yet. So first 3 years were pretty good, and then fourth year was just a beast, and stuff happened, and I grew up real fast. So I lasted 14 years. By the end, I think I was a pretty good president, but I was an on-the-job president for the first 5 years who was out of his depth.
explain what that looks like. I think a lot of people will relate to that who are listeners of ours, different leaders that I know. What is that? What is that like to be out of your depth for those first 4 to 5 years?
I was married to a woman who didn't like pretense, doesn't like pretense, and she always would keep me grounded. I owe Mary so much for lasting at InterVarsity because if I hadn't had her reality and her sense of counterbalancing my ego, and then when I was down, she would lift me up. I don't know what I would have done. I also had a really good team and people who I trusted, who cared for me. But when you're president, it's different than being a dean. It's like it's as they always say, it's lonely, and it can be horribly lonely when it's not going well. So
Yeah.
I think, but for Mary, I wouldn't have lasted,
Hmm.
and I'm so glad I did because there were some wonderful years with wonderful results from our mission and what we were trying to do. So I look back, and it was one of the great experiences of my life. Absolutely,
People wouldn't know this either, but your wife Mary was one of my professors as
that's
well.
right. Accounting, yeah,
And
that's right.
and accounting, yes. And so I have two sons who are deeply finance and accounting. So I think I sent you a note recently saying my younger son is studying for the CPA. He's taking the first section now and he's going for the rest.
And
So
he passed, right?
oh, I don't know yet. We'll find
Okay.
out.
Oh, okay.
Because
Way
it
to
takes
go.
a while to get the scores back, but it's yeah, so I wanted Mary to know that the accounting gene skipped a generation, but it's there. So that's amazing. So one of the things that I'm really fascinated about, I was thinking about this related to you because, my original introduction to Alec, other than getting the opportunity to sometimes be a ringer on your softball team and different ways that I got a chance to interact with you. And I would call you such a key mentoring voice in my life early on, just giving me bits of wisdom that I remember those things. You have to be careful what you say to me because I will
Hmm.
not only hear it, but I will try to practice it. But one of the things I was thinking about, Alec, is this. I know you had a chance to read our State of Trust at Work report, and I was thinking about it related. I don't know where this would go, but related to just the concept of ethics as well. Looking back on some of the things you've written about in business ethics, we don't have to go there, but I am for some reason when I think of you and some of the things that you were teaching way back, and then getting into your leadership role. We don't just if we can go there if we want, but I'm curious that first of all, maybe I set the stage and I say, so you had a chance to review that report. What stood out to you? I want to get Alec's brain in this conversation on trust.
Well, there were three things, and the first one is that the island of trust. I found it interesting. You had this four box,
Yeah.
and the island of trust is defined as high team trust but low organizational trust, and only 8% of the people were in that box. I was really surprised that was so low because in
Hmm.
my experience at InterVarsity, that was the descriptor that fit. I came in, I remember it's a very distributed organization in the sense that regions are given a lot of autonomy, and it's one of the geniuses of InterVarsity that 24-year-old staff are responsible for a campus. Uh, and they have to, so University of Puget Sound or University of Washington or wherever it might be, and they're 24 and they have to really think. So you want them to be entrepreneurial. So you don't want a top-down organization. But on the other hand, when I arrived in the first month on the job, I heard the term states' rights three times in different
Oh,
parts of the country. States' rights, which is a Civil War term.
yeah.
Basically, they were saying, okay, you're the federal government, and we really don't want you messing much in our region. What happened was then you have a terrible lack of alignment. You have regions that are kind of doing this and regions that are doing that. I think we had 10, 12 regions. And so the goal was not to kill the entrepreneurial spirit, but at the same time align so we were all headed in the same direction. That was major change management. It was major as I look back on it. And I think we largely succeeded. My number two guy, Jim, was there for 12 years and I was for 14. And we were a great team together. Jim was kind of inside, I was kind of outside. And Jim was a long timer with InterVarsity. He was a real pro. The culture changed over time, became more aligned, and flourished. And that was that, but that there was a cost to alignment, right? When you try to
Mm.
align something that big that's been going for 60, 70 years, kind of in one direction, and you want people to say, okay, this is our North Star, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do training together. Those were all major challenges. So I'd say that was the first reaction I had is
Uh,
the islands of trust where they had high team loyalty and trust, but they had a distrust, if I can use that term, sometimes of national.
hmm.
And
What did you do to begin to create that alignment?
well, first of all, we didn't announce anything. We didn't come out and say, okay, we're going to be anti-states' rights and we're going to try to align. We did it subtly and over a period of years. So largely it was through hiring and promoting. We did it through more training of the senior leaders. Um, I think there were a couple people Jim asked to leave, or they left, so there was kind of a weaning that occurred over maybe 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
We were very patient. I think that's the first word is we knew where we wanted to go with this, but we didn't announce it, we didn't force it. We and then we began to raise money. And so what happened with the money we raised, I mean, good money. And for the first time in InterVarsity's history, there was national, actually not just taking overhead, but providing money back. And we were able to say, these were our priorities. And if you want to receive funds, this is what you need. And now we created this plan or the plans with them in the room. So it wasn't like we imposed anything on them. We all agreed as sort of a covenant, a social contract that we want to go. But once the money started to flow, it really realigned a lot of people's what they actually did with their priorities. And we got back to the meat and potatoes of what InterVarsity was.
Building trust in your business starts with being able to measure it so that you can create a pathway for change. Our Wild Trust Index measures the drivers of trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. We are building the largest database on the drivers of trust inside of organizations. This survey will inform growth imperatives and the necessary organizational change needed to fuel that growth. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.
In the intervarsity system, do those regional leaders function fairly autonomously with this reporting mechanism to the mothership, for lack of a better
I
description?
would say that when I came, that was true. There was more accountability and more alignment when I left, and I don't mean to say that boastfully. That's largely
Yeah,
Jim. That's largely
yeah.
Jim, but um, um, I mean, one person compared them to franchise owners who have ran, who basically ran their own franchises. And that
Okay.
may be a little extreme, but
Yeah.
and you can swing too far the other way too, where again you kill the golden goose by being overly prescriptive and being too top down. So
Yeah.
whether we have it right when I left, I don't know, but I think it was more in balance
Yeah.
over the 14 years.
I ask that because we work with so many organizations where they could remind me of our old work with denominational churches where the denominational leaders, they have authority but they don't, you know what I mean? And so it's this
Exactly.
tricky thing of there's sometimes a fear on the part of some leaders in those kinds of organizations. Some of the nonprofits we work with are like that as well. Some of the associations where they have regional kinds of spaces, but they don't really have that top down kind of power and centralization of things. And so one of the things that occurs is there's almost like a fear of requiring anything. Does that make sense?
The university is a bit like that with tenured faculty.
Yeah.
And InterVarsity, to make this more complicated, part of the fundraising model is staff would raise their own support, meaning they would have to contact donors. So they're raising their own support, and then they're paying 13% overhead to the national. Well, if that doesn't set you up for a sense of the national's a burden because it's taking money out of the money that I raise, but it also, I don't really need national because I'm raising the support. Most organizations, national raises the funds and distributes it. But this created a psychology where national was a cipher and also not
Mhm.
le and less relevant.
Okay.
So I would say now again, the genius of it was that we got more staff, and these staff were really empowered to go out and do their work. So there's all these trade-offs that occur, but it was particularly true the psychology you're describing at
Yeah.
InterVarsity.
Talk to me more about trust because I'm curious on Alec Hill's take on this. One of the things that has been so interesting for us is that so often trust feels like, I described this to my team on Monday. For people, it feels almost like vapor. It's something that everyone knows you have to have it. Like our world quite literally doesn't function without it. I don't even drive down the road unless I trust someone's not going to cross over the lane. I won't
Right.
go into my local coffee shop unless I trust I can go in there and not get sick or hurt somehow. Um, but at the same time, it's one of our things we've been saying is like it's something that it has a chemistry and then you can actually measure it, and you don't get trust by talking about trust. You get it by doing a bunch of other things. And so I'm just curious about your take on trust, Alec.
So, well, that was actually nice segue. You led me right into the next point I had in mind. So, when I was first hire people, there were the three C's. There was competence, character, and chemistry. And I hired and promoted in that order. Competence was always number one, character was number two, and chemistry was kind of a lagging third. The
Mm,
more I led, it reversed in the sense that chemistry became the most important. And I would say by the end, I was saying at my time at InterVarsity, I was saying chemistry is 50% of the game. You hire for 50%. It's by far the most important. And you have to have a level of competence, and you certainly have to have character. But chemistry, without chemistry, trust, uh, team building, all that stuff is dead. So when I read your report,
yeah.
I resonated with the chemistry language because it's coincides with what I preached for years in my latter part of my tenure. Chemistry, and I hired people for competence who had very little chemistry on the team. Always didn't work out. Um, you really have to. It's not just people who fold in and who are nice. That's not what chemistry is about. It's people who can throw a punch, can take a punch, can disassociate them, differentiate yourself. I think is one of the terms in your report.
Yeah.
They can take a position but not take the criticism personally. And when you get that sort of chemistry where there's give and take, but we're all going to the North Star, we're being honest, we're being accountable. Um, Again, sort of the magic occurs of flow. Are you familiar with the term flow? So
Hmm.
it's a crew term. And when you get flow say you get eight people rowing together, and you're actually almost on top of the water. And I look back in my career, and I've experienced flow a few times, but it's really where you want to be. And when it happens, you have to have the chemistry, you have to have the trust. You can't have flow without trust.
That's so fascinating because one of the things I tell people that you kind of bled in there was that if I selected for one thing, outside, let's say that competence is all equal, and I've got bunch of candidates. They've all got equal levels of ability to do the job. The next thing I'm going to look for is the willingness to change. You know, that
Yes.
willingness to
Yes.
like to
Yes. 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 Yes.
which you kind of described as a little bit of a part of chemistry also, right? There's like this, I don't know.
You know, some people have a feedback loop in their head where they can take the data, they can change, they improve. Some people, there's no loop.
Yeah.
I've been amazed with people who are extremely talented, they're really smart, but they get the criticism on their end evaluation, nothing changes. And that's a hopelessness in terms of being a senior leader. You can't you can't move forward with people who don't take data and improve. And that's part of chemistry because it affects the
Yeah.
whole team. But it's really there's something limiting in that person that yeah. Anyway, it's a bit mind-boggling. Well, now we all can do it. We can all shut out the data that we're not perfect and that this is where we should work. But some people do it more effectively.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what did you as you got to that level of scale, and I talk about scale often because, you know, as this is more for our listeners, but as you know, we start off on this journey and we're builders is the metaphor I use. Like we start off, we're going to build something either on our own or we're going to be supporting some other builder. So we're going to, whatever our discipline is, whatever we were raised in, whatever line of work, we start to build. And then all of a sudden people join us and now we have a team, right? We have a group of people. And then as we get multiple teams and the building moves to larger and larger scale, things change. And if we overemphasize scale, we lose track of individuals. And if we overfocus on individuals, we lose track of scale. And what people don't so often face in leadership is that you have to do both. You know what I mean? You have to have this understanding scale and then also maintaining an attentiveness to the one. Like our wild leader statement is being attentive to the one while, with a focus on the many. So it's focusing on the one with an eye to the many is the way we say it. How did you, as you moved into that scale, how do you manage something like chemistry at scale?
Well, okay, this is a confession story. So there's a book years ago called What Got You Here Won't Get You There.
Yeah.
And the book is so-so, but the title is gold. And what got me to InterVarsity was my individual caring, but I had no sense of scale. I had limited sense of scale. So what got me, I didn't understand multi-tier communication. I didn't understand repeating the communication over and over again. There were just there were so many things I was green about. So I think sometimes we don't learn it cognitively. We learn it by being bumped and bruised, which was my experience. And we make mistakes, and then we find people who are wiser and better, and they give us words and terms. So that was my story. I'd like to say that I was a genius and I was always a step ahead. I'd say for 5 years I was a step behind on that.
Huh. It's interesting. Um, so for others, I'm curious about this, how you see, like, what is the most important trust challenge you see leaders facing today? I know it's a huge question.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad you wrote in advance because that is a tough one. I think it's navigating polarization. So I have these 20 mentees that I talk with monthly, and they're all over the world, and they're doing different things. And I want to explain how I met these people because I don't even know how I met some of them. But this sense that with culture fragmenting, not just in the United States but in other countries as well, and of course the political polarization we don't even need to discuss here. You have racial polarization. And I think for senior leaders, and then of course you have social media and you have, there's no limits anymore to an audience. I used to be able to give a talk and I had a feeling that it would kind of stay in that. But any talk, anything you write is now, it's just distributed. Um, so as a leader, because of the polarization, you can't express your opinion on everything. So you have to figure out, okay, what are the issues I need to express my opinion on, and what are the ones I need to keep my mouth shut? And one of the things I love about now being a decade out of senior leadership is I don't have those limits anymore. For 14 years, I walked around conscious that if I misspoke, my staff would lose donors. If I
Yeah.
said something, and um, now I'm free to be me again and to say what I think about immigration or whatever the topic is. But there were years where I had to be very judicious. So I think I really feel a pain in my heart for senior leaders who have to walk this line now of trying to navigate the polarization. So not being sort of mamby-pamby-ish on the one hand, but also if you take positions, you're going to get shot at and you're going to lose support and then you're going to have internal strife. It's incredibly hard. So I think that's the number one issue.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting in our research that the ability to tell the truth as you understand it to each other
Yeah.
was one of the key drivers of trust, but also one of the places that we struggle with the most. And I wonder about that because even when I talked to my dad, who was a career college and seminary president, we talk about that often about the polarization in the world and how in the world do you navigate this? How do you navigate this moment as a leader? Um, Bringing out your core convictions, which is so necessary for leadership, and at the same time being attentive to all the different sides of the aisle.
So let me give you an example. So World Vision came to us and wanted us to endorse their petition on blood diamonds in Africa, all this mining that was going on. It seemed like a no-brainer, but in the fine print there was the mediating agency was a group in Switzerland, and so one of my trustees looked up this agency and wasn't pleased with the political positions and all of this. So we had this debate within the board about whether we should endorse this. It wasn't central to our mission. I mean, we were a campus ministry, and we weren't global justice. That wasn't our thing. And I remember going, how is this so complicated that something like blood diamonds should become something that's hard to decide on?
Yeah.
But it was. It was.
Uh,
Um, we were asked to sign on to an immigration petition, which seemed very neutral and moderate in terms of its position. But again, because of the polarization. Now, that was 10 years ago. Today, it's just it's inflamed. So I really feel sorry for leaders who have to navigate the complexity. Let me, so my
yeah.
pitch is that we need to unbundle all these issues, and whether it's creation or it's a life or whatever, climate change, we need to look at these individually. But what's happened is with polarization, people bundle these issues together. So if you're somehow, with Panama Canal, so if somehow you take a position that doesn't fall in the tribe, you're then a heretic. And
Mhm.
even though you have 9 out of 10 that you agree with on. So anyway, that's made it harder.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So selfishly, I want to hear because I love the way your brain works, Alec. Was there one more thing from our research that you clued in on, something that was important for
I building it
pay
was the
attention
30
to?
to 50-year-old thing. That just struck me right down the middle where they're the least connected, the least trusting. And we did our own surveys and it's consistent with what you found, but the way it was articulated in the report was so much stronger that the newbies and the old bees are more happy and contented, and the in-betweens are going through their crises. They're hitting their ceilings. They're not getting promoted. They feel stuck. They have a mortgage. They have kids. They're like when you were in your 30s and 40s, and I was my 30s and 40s.
Yeah,
So part of it's generic. I think that's one of the epiphanies here is that this is so every organization faces this, but they're your least happy, most restless people, and they're probably your most critical people because they're the center stage of they need to be leading, and some of them are quite frustrated.
yeah. It's the research that Alex referencing is our research on age by the decades. And I was fascinated by that too. There were two things that kind of blew me away. First of all, was that nearly half of people are living in that jungle was actually pretty surprising. When I saw the data and I'm like, these are because I've been there, and when you're working in a jungle where you don't trust your team members and you don't trust your organization, it just can rot you from the inside out. And it's difficult. And I'm not blaming organizations in those statements. I'm very protective of that viewpoint on the world, but the other piece of it was that 20 somethings were had the highest level of trust in their team members and their organization. And Alec, I just spoke in chapel down at Point Loma. And so a bunch of my son's peers are there. And I was sharing that data with them. And this is my theory is that in your 20s, that you haven't really experienced the distrust yet. So you haven't experienced maybe some people have. I'm not minimizing some of the experiences folks have, but when they enter that working world, they're kind of like, this is your moment to do the hard thing. And as soon as you start to do the hard thing and you're involved in a team now, now you realize, okay, this is what the jungle of trust looks like. I have to trust people. And then what we saw is over the decades, for whatever reason, it started to climb back up. So the
Mhm.
30s, the 40s, the 50s. And so I don't know what that's about. That'd be our next study, but it is fascinating to think about. I think some people assume that generationally 20 somethings are distrusting,
Yes,
and we
yes.
found something different than that, you know?
No, I think it's absolutely right. It struck a chord with me. There's a wonderful innocence, if I can use that, of new
Yeah,
people coming in, and trust. And they it's like the presumption is trust. The presumption.
yeah,
So we can knock the Z's all we want, but they, they're actually easier in the sense of leaning into the organization than their 35-year-old counterparts are as a group.
yeah, as a group. Okay, I got to ask you one more question. And I know you've been through a lot, like in these last few years, and as it relates to trust and leadership, legacy and impact, I'm just curious about how the reset on the shot clock for you call it bonus time, that's your book, right, is like how did that impact you? How has your perspective on leadership relationships and trust changed for after all you've been through? Because you did not
So
think you were going to have these moments.
no, so at 62, I had a bone marrow cancer and not a good chance of living. And if I did live, I would be in pain and suffering and on a lot of meds. So here I am 10 years later, taking virtually no meds and out last week, camping with my wife in Central Washington. So it's total grace. It has nothing to do with my own merit. If my brother was a perfect match and everything went right. So
Wow.
so I think in the last 10 years, I'm 72 now. So in the last 10 years, as I reflect on who I am, I've become more pastoral, if I can use that word.
Yeah.
I'm a better listener. I care. So in my mentoring relationships, there's a I'm constantly leaning into to people and I think they sense that because I know I have limited time on this earth. I think anybody in your audience who's faced mortality, it changes you when you know that the clock is ticking and it's ticking for all of us. We just aren't aware of it as much, but I'm very aware of it. Three things that I wish I had known before that I know now. Um, I think I would have trusted my intuition more then when I was senior leader. I was
Mm,
very data driven and I like consultants and I didn't trust my gut enough. So that's the one piece of advice I'd give that as I look back, if I had it to do over again, my gut was pretty good in my 50s. I didn't listen to it as much and I didn't give it as much credence as I should have. I think second of all, I would have accepted the fact that I can't fix everybody. There was
mm,
something in my temperament. The first fun question about being a people pleaser. Um,
yeah.
I there's a bit of a messianic bent in me, which is unhealthy. I'm not the Messiah, but I pretended, I think, for years that I could read people and I could fix them, and I learned that that often wasn't true, and I wish I hadn't had that because it led me to compromises in terms of having to make decisions. So the third thing I wish I'd been more decisive in making personnel changes when they were needed. But because of my sense of having to fix everybody, um, um, I, I I waited too long to make some
Mm,
choices. And there's a loss of trust. If you keep a person in a role where he or she is not suited, it's not going well, the people below that person are not being taken care of well, you lose a lot of trust. And
yeah.
in my sense of humanity, that I was trying to be kind to a person, the cost associated with other people was often high. And I
Mm,
and I was inactive when I should have made changes. So
okay.
those are things that I look back on at this age and stage.
Is it possible to lean into lessons like that when you're still in the middle of that high press moment? You know what I mean? I always wonder because I'm drawn to, I always say I'm drawn to type A personalities who grew up. And
Yeah.
a lot of times it's after all of that major pressure on them in a senior leadership role. Can you do it when you're still in it?
Well, my plane is in the hangar, and so I'm doing all these reflections. But when you're leading a large organization, the plane is in the air, and it's much harder to make those changes. And yet, if you don't make some change, it's gonna fall apart, and you're gonna fail. So you have to make some changes, but it's just much harder when it's all happening at the same time.
Yeah,
I
that's
empathize. I feel my heart bleeds for senior leaders today. I just think it's so hard and it's so remarkable. So I just want to encourage people that you're doing remarkable stuff, and you will come at a time like me when you look back and you go, "It's amazing that I survived," and I wish I'd done some things differently. But my goodness, what a ride it was!
Alec, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you indeed. We want the people listening or watching Alec to know what's the best way for them to connect with you.
Well, I think the cancer book, if that touched any stories, I do a blog. They can just type in my name and they'll see stuff.
If you're listening and not watching his name on the screen, if you want to look it up, Alec Hill, AlecHillo. Okay, Alec, one last wild question. Are you in a season of accepting yourself or changing yourself?
Surprisingly, I think I'm in a season of change. I think I'm amazed at this phase of my life that I'm a different person than I was in the earlier phase. I like this person. Mary likes this person. I'm more opinionated on some things where I'm less more candid. On the other hand, I'm softer and easier. Um, yeah, we've been married 47 years, so she's known me a long time. So she's my barometer. I think she likes this person. So that's good.
That's good news. Thank you, Alec, so much for such a rich conversation.
Thank
Yeah,
you. My
thank
pleasure.
you.
Thank you for listening to this Wild Conversation podcast. For more information, visit wildleaders.org, click on the Wild Trust platform, and get started with the Wild Trust Index today.